BBC News. Tonight we bring you the latest breaking news from across the globe. Our top stories today include why Donald Trump is the wrong choice, the introduction of the 48-piece chicken nuggets at McDonald's, and more. The first story we have for today is what are the initial causes and consequences for Google due to their anti-competitive practice in Europe, both short-term and long-term. On Wednesday, the 20th of April, the European Union fined Google for using its dominant Android mobile operating system to squeeze out rivals. The company was oppressing competitive firms by ensuring that Google Search and Google Chrome were pre-installed applications that were forced onto the operating system. The European Competition Commissioner, Margaret Vestager, stated that a competitive mobile internet sector is increasingly important for consumers and businesses in Europe, which is exactly what Google worked against. She also said that the European Union believes that Google's behavior denies consumers a wider choice of mobile apps and services and stands in the way of innovations by other players. About 80% of smart mobile devices in Europe and the world run on Android, and that Google holds more than 90% of the market for general internet searches on Android in the European Economic Area. Therefore, by participating in anti-competitive practice, they have undermined the EU and have not been working under set standards. Anti-competitive practice is simply diluting or preventing competition for business in a market. It is usually illegal in many areas across the world because of the ability to exploit consumers and governments alike. We have a news reporter at the EU headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. On to you, Pranav.
Thank you, Luca. I'm currently inside a hotel near EU headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. I'm not being able to go anywhere near the outside of the EU headquarters due to the tight security. Therefore, I'll be reporting inside this hotel. We had earlier received news that EU is threatening Google with a $6 billion fine. This is because Google had done an anti-competitive deal with Android. Now, why was this caused, you might ask? Google had made a small requirement for mobile phone manufacturers to pre-install Google Search and Google Chrome browsers. Because of this, many people will not get third-party apps and Google will be dominant in the industry. This is bad because this means they might have control over the whole industry. Why might they have done this, you ask? Well, theoretically speaking, Google has made a revenue of over $11 billion on just ad sales on Android phones. They must have done so to keep the revenue going higher and higher. This course of action has many risks, just like this one, but Google seems to be prepared for the consequences because they had been battling EU charges of promoting its own shopping services in internet searches. Currently, EU is trying its best to land the fine on Google so things like this will never occur again. But Google seems to be handling it very well and seems to have powerful lawyers battling it all against EU. And since Google is an US-based company, the EU does not have much power over Google. That's all I got for now. Back to you, Luca.
Thank you, Pranav. Now, Google, which has had 12 weeks to respond to the EU charges, insisted that Android was a remarkable system based on an open source software and open innovation. Google's General Counsel, Kent Walker, said that we look forward to working with the European Commission to demonstrate that Android is good for competition and good for consumers. He said any phone maker could load Google apps and rival products, and those users had the freedom of choice as well. The EU charged Google with giving significant financial incentives to some of the world's largest smartphone makers to pre-install Google Search exclusively on their devices. Mozilla, which develops the Firefox browser, said in a statement, "This behavior is one of the reasons why launching competitive products such as Firefox for mobile and Firefox OS is challenging. We see substantial value in removing barriers to entry so competition and innovation can flourish. With estimated revenues of 11 billion from ad sales on Android phones with Google apps such as Maps, Search, and Gmail, the stakes are high for the tech giant. Short term, Google will most likely have to pay a large sum in fines, currently predicted at 6 billion, which is larger than half their revenue from Android and Google apps, and will most likely be restricted in their business activity in Europe. By looking at this first graph, we can see the importance of Google apps according to the revenue is very little. However, the data was recorded in 2009 and may be outdated and relatively unreliable. By looking at the second graph, we can see that Google's total overall recorded revenue in 2015 was almost $75 billion, which represents the power of the group and perhaps the downscaling of the disadvantage of reduced activity in Europe. The data is very recent and therefore very reliable. Long term, however, Google's reputation has been dragged through the mud even further because of another EU charge against Google in 2010, which has resurfaced. Also, Google may suffer from long-term losses in revenue due to the heavy fines and restricted business in Europe. It is debatable whether these sanctions are beneficial for the community, as it is evident that Google was lessening competition, but it is not proved to have any direct exploitation of the consumers. Google has not harmed the customers, but it is unsure whether they could have done so in the future. There are current debates on whether Google's behavior was anti-competitive or simply dominant. It is possible to state that Google will be experiencing many long-term and short-term consequences for their actions in Europe. You can tell us your opinions on the website. Thank you.